Hello, all you viewers of Doctor BMS, and welcome to another discussion today on addiction to drugs and alcohol. I would like us to ask ourselves a question, a simple question today. Why do people get addicted to drugs? Why do some people get addicted to drugs and others don't? Why do some people get addicted to alcohol while others do not? And this will be the subject of our short discussion today. So, straight to the topic. If you remember in the previous videos I've made, I've discussed the journey of addiction and addiction recovery. The way someone starts by experimenting with alcohol and drugs and feeling happy about it as they use more and more, and the body gets used to these drugs, to the alcohol, and before they realize they are now regular users, and some may progress to be problematic users or abusers, and others may even go into addiction so that you can see them to be what is said drunk junkies or alcoholics. And these are the people who most of the times we get in our rehabilitation center, Fountain of Hope. I've also talked about how they recover slowly, regaining their body health, then their mind and their spirit. I have also talked about why people start using drugs. We've talked about peer influence, we've talked about pop culture, we've talked about advertising, we've talked about social media, we've talked about uh, the free society we are having today where customs, traditions, and parental control is weakening. All these things we've said lead people to start using drugs and alcohol. But the question remains, why do they get addicted? Because not everyone gets addicted, especially to some drugs like alcohol and the not so hard drugs. There are those who use and they seem to be fine. I have made a video talking about the functional alcoholic. This is a person who uses and seems to be okay, but they run a risk of sliding into addiction. But before they do that, they are functional alcoholics or drug users. Why then do some people progress into addiction quickly, others don't, or progress slowly? I would like to distill it for you today so that you understand and you use it as a barometer to look at yourself and someone you care for. People sink into abuse and addiction for two main reasons. And I'll add a third reason which applies to everyone, but the two do not apply to everyone. That's why I single them out. These two reasons are that you are genetically predisposed to addiction, to abuse, or that you use drugs to a level, to an extent where the control fails and you now slide into addiction. I'll discuss each one of them. But before I do that, let me talk about the third one, which I said is standard across all the categories, both categories. And this is that drugs of addiction are so called because they have this property of inducing addiction. And in simple terms, this means that when you use them, you get hooked. And this means when you use them, you reach a point where you cannot control yourself. You crave them, your body wants them. And even if you say you do not want to take them, you seem powerless to stop. and they seem to take over your life and control it such that everything you do is for the purpose of getting the drug and using it, even when there are risks to your health, your safety, your security, your career development, your family, your relationships. It does not matter. The drugs take over, and we say you are now in addiction. These drugs are called drugs of addiction, and you know them. Alcohol is one of them. Cigarettes, tobacco is another one. Marijuana. We have the hard drugs, cocaine, heroin, amphetamines, sleeping pills. There's a whole lot of these drugs. These drugs have this characteristic that once you start to use them, after a short time, your body seems to get hooked on them. You cannot control, and they take over. When in fact you started being the master, they become the master and you become their servant. So people get hooked, people get addicted. All the people get addicted is because they are using drugs of addiction. It's just as obvious as that. But as we said, some people get into addiction while others seem not to get or progress slowly. And this is the main purpose of today's discussion. I said there are two reasons. One is that your genetic predisposition or your genetic makeup is causing this, or your rate of usage is causing this. Let's start with genetic predisposition. Genetic predisposition, genetics from your high school biology. Genetics is how God created you, your makeup. You're male, you're female, you're tall, you're short, you're black, you're white, you have big eyes, you have a flat nose. All those is because of genetics, the makeup from your creator, which is encoded in your genes, which you inherit from your parents and your foreparents, and you cannot change. Now, we know that addiction runs in families. Addiction has a bloodline. If your relatives were abusers of alcohol or drugs and they got into addiction, there's a likelihood that you may also fall into addiction. And so this is the inheritance that we are talking about. So people become addicted because it runs in their families. And for every one of you listening to me out there, you need, as you try alcohol and drugs, to go back into your family history and see if there are people in your family line who have been addicted to alcohol and drugs, and know that you run a risk because you may have carried this inheritance in your blood, in your genes. The second reason I said was because you are using drugs to a level beyond which you can no longer control. And this is very important because remember, the addiction because of inheritance, because of genetics, you may say it's something that is God given and maybe you could not do anything about it. Although you started using drugs in the first place, you will not get addicted if you didn't use drugs, even if it's in your genes. But this second one of you using drugs to a level where you lose control is really within your powers to do something. And this is the purpose of today's video, so that I educate you. But as you start experimenting with alcohol, you young person in college, you person of any age who is now feeling like, well, I can enjoy myself, remember that you start with one bottle, you start with one puff of your cigarette or your roll of marijuana, one sniff of cocaine, and as you go to the second and third, you will reach a point where your body cannot contain it anymore. And that point is where addiction comes in. Remember, young people, when maybe you are in college, you went out with friends to take alcohol, which is the commonest drug in our country here, And there are friends of yours, after just one bottle of beer, they seem to be drunk already, while others can continue and hammer it forever. The difference is in the genetic makeup, as I've said. But now, if you continue using without moderation, without checking back, even if your body is strong, you will reach a point of no return. And at that point, addiction will start setting in. Your body is used to it, your mind thinks about it, and you cannot function without it, because if you try, you get those called withdrawal effects, which are not good things, and you continue using and sliding into addiction proper. So, back to my question, the question I wanted us to answer today: why do people get addicted to drugs? Why do some people get addicted more than others, faster than others? Number one, because you are using drugs of addiction: alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana, cocaine, amphetamines, diazepam, and other sleeping pills. All those are addictive drugs and they are likely to cause an addiction in you. Number two, you may have a genetic predisposition. You have a weakness in your genes which runs in your family, such that when you use drugs, you are likely to go down the drain. Okay? And the last and perhaps most important is that you are using drugs to a level which is dangerous. And if you're not aware about this and you continue feeling happy and seeking pleasure, like I said, humans like seeking pleasure and feeling happy, you will reach a point where you may not turn back. Even if addiction does not run in your family, even if the drug you are using is not as addictive, it is weak. You may say alcohol does not cause addiction like marijuana does or like cocaine does. But regardless of your genetic makeup and the drug you are using, you will end up in addiction because you have gone too far. So, every person listening to me, look at yourself, evaluate yourself, and see that what you set out to do, was it to get addicted to drugs, or you are just enjoying yourself and thinking drugs will help you make or feel happier? And moderate. For the legal drugs like alcohol in the country, you can take moderate. For the illegal drugs, the hard drugs, don't go there. Don't go there, because for those ones, the threshold for addiction is so narrow. You just take one puff of marijuana for some people, that's the end of it, you're hooked. You just snort cocaine, a pinch of cocaine like this, or you shoot one heroin in an injection, and you are gone down the drain of addiction. Don't go there. Don't fall to addiction because you are using drugs of addiction, or you have a genetic predisposition in your family and you're not aware of this, or you're ignoring it, or you are taking your experiment, your pleasure seeking, too far, so that even if you are using mild drugs like alcohol, which otherwise would not cause a severe addiction like cocaine and the hard drugs, you will end up being addicted and a junkie of alcohol and drugs like anyone else who started with those so-called hard drugs. Thank you very much for listening to me. And as always, subscribe to our channel, Dr. BMS, so that we can continue this good discussion about our health of body, mind, and soul. See you next time.